Good evening, everyone. So we'll now get started. My name is Cassidy. I'm the Public Relations Officer for Women Leaders of Color. Women Leaders of Color is the first undergraduate organization here at Cornell dedicated to empowering women of color on campus to step into leadership positions. Through our events, workshops, programs, we hope to inspire women of color at Cornell to achieve their greatest potential. Tonight, we're incredibly excited to host a very special fireside chat with Nadya Okamoto, moderated by our founder and president, Trisha Beher. So a little bit about Nadya. Nadya Okamoto is a 25-year-old Harvard graduate. In early 2020, she co-founded August, a lifestyle brand working to reimagine periods. Nadya is also the founder of Period, an organization fighting to end period poverty and stigma that she founded at the age of 16. Under her leadership as executive director for 5 years, Period has addressed over 1.5 million period issues and registered over 800 campus chapters in all 50 states and 50 other countries. In 2018, Nadya published her debut book, Period Power, a manifesto for the menstrual movement with publisher Simon Schuster, which made the Kirkus Reviews list for Best Young Adult Nonfiction of 2018. Nadya has been recognized on the list as Forbes 30 Under 30, Bloomberg 50 Ones to Watch, and People's Magazine's Women Changing the World, along with a plethora of other news sources. We hope you were able to pick up a period-powered book on your way in, as well as some period products from August. Now our event will commence with a fireside chat interview, followed by a 15 to 20-minute audience Q&A. Then we'll be moving into a book signing and meet and greet where you can treat yourself to boba and meet Nadya herself. Without further ado, please help me welcome Nadya Okamoto.
Hi. Do I sit here? Yes. You have to introduce yourself now.
Hi. Hi everyone, I'm Trisha. I'm the founder and president of WLC, and I'm so excited to be able to interview Nadya Okamoto today.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear us okay? Yeah? Okay, cool.
So I'm super excited. Thanks for being here with us today. We can just get it started by, you can talk about your background for those in the audience that don't know about your journey with Period and your current endeavors.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of sad, but yeah, I started on the nonprofit side and worked for like 6 years. And I would describe my career as like really just in response to what I was learning. Like when I started my nonprofit, there was no part of me that thought I was gonna run a period care company. That was when I was in my like only nonprofit girly, like I am gonna go into like public service and really be about that. And then I think that the more I learned about the nonprofit world and the organization grew, I started to feel like I could do a lot more if I was working on the policy side. So then I tried to run for office and I hated it, and I realized it was just a lot of fundraising. And so then it was like, okay, if I don't want to, work in campaign politics, what does it look like to change culture? And I think that's really where I fell in love with like media and just the like concept of brands and how brands can change culture in like a very consumerist society. And yeah, a couple years ago decided to start August, my junior year of college, and we've been around for about 2 years, and it's been like a big learning curve, like learning how to raise VC money and like what it looks like to run a for-profit company after for so many years identifying as like a hardcore anti-capitalist, which I still am, but have to very aware that I'm also a venture-backed founder. And yeah, we just launched in Target, so it's been kind of a crazy last few weeks. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to your journey in founding Period, why you started it, and maybe some of the biggest challenges you encountered, and how did you grow your nonprofit despite the obvious challenges that you faced while doing so?
Yeah. Well, it was almost 10 years ago, because I'm older. I'm like 9. We just made a TikTok. You know that TikTok where it's like, what year were you born? And they're like 19, like 19. Anyways, we were just making that TikTok because I was born in 1998 and you were born in 2002. But yeah, so anyways, off topic. I started the nonprofit when I was 16. At the time, like, I was really passionate about period poverty. It was an issue that I had never thought of before, and I kind of found myself in a situation where my family was going through housing instability, so I had it top of mind, like this idea of what are basic necessities and what are not basic necessities. And learning about period poverty for me was like a huge privilege check, realizing like, wow, no matter what I was going through, I've never had to worry about period poverty, and what kind of privilege it is that it wasn't even on my radar. And I think that that privilege check is really honestly what continues to drive me today, because to me it's such an obvious problem that should be resolved. And so when I wanted to start an organization, well, at first when I got passionate about it, my idea was not, oh, I'm going to start a nonprofit. It was like, okay, in school, I learned that when I'm passionate about an issue, I find a place to volunteer, right? Like in middle school, they teach you, hey, what issue do you care about? How do you like Google for volunteer opportunities? Fill out this form for community service hours. So that's what I was originally trying to do. And in 2014, I could not find any nonprofits that focused specifically on period poverty within the US, right? There was a few organizations like Days for Girls and Girl Up who talked about period poverty as an issue of the global South, where they would talk about how period poverty is a thing in different countries where it leads to female genital mutilation and child marriage. But it's not really talked about in the US. There's not a lot of research. But at the time, I learned that 40 states in the US had a sales tax on period products, considering them luxury items. Meanwhile, products like Rogaine, Viagra, and penile pumps, which I had to look up what those were when I was 16, it was very traumatizing, were considered medical necessities. And so for me, it was like trying to find an organization, realizing there wasn't one, and then me thinking like, oh, I guess I can start one. And it was just like a lot of Googling, like how to start a nonprofit and filling out whatever governmental form came in my way. And I think that, the obvious challenge was I started with the simple idea of people need period products, so I need to get period products and donate them. So it was, how do I create drives at my school, like collection drives? Then how do I contact companies to get them to donate? I think that's something I did not ever, at the beginning, I had no concept of, oh, could be a job, right? Like it was a volunteer thing for me. I never thought it would become like a career. I never thought I would have a staff, and I never thought it would be like a multi-million-dollar nonprofit budget within a few years. And I think, I was the 16-year-old who was like, let me just try anything. Like at the beginning, I would literally busk, like play guitar on the street corner and sing Christmas carols and hand out like cookies that didn't taste good, asking for people to donate like $1 to $5. And like that's just because I was like, oh, raise money, like how do I raise money? For a 16-year-old, they're like this. And then, okay, I want to get volunteers to put care packages together. Let me just do this thing called Facebook, and I'm just gonna do that. And then slowly word just kept spreading and posting on social media. And I think for me, I was just kind of in this like, toxic girl boss, whatever you want to call it, like, okay, here's the thing, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go really quickly. And so all that to say, I think there were a lot of barriers specifically around fundraising and like getting people to, take me really seriously. And every time there was a milestone, like someone handed me a $20 bill. I cried the first time someone gave me a $20 bill for a donation, right? Then that becomes a $10,000 check to a $50,000 check to a $250,000 check. But I think that, all that to say, I think that that's really how I did it. It was like, if I didn't have the answer, I would just try something new. I kind of had to release any sort of shame of just talking to periods with literally anyone. But I'll say that I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I think that there's been a lot of learning that I've had to do over the last few years, because the organization did end up growing so quickly, and I was like in this kind of position where I was balancing the organization, going to school, applying for colleges, and having to keep running it behind the scenes. And I always feel like I want to say that because it wasn't like this glorious thing on the outside. It was like I was trying to make this organization work. I was trying to raise money, but I was really in over my head a lot of the time. And I talk a lot about this now, but I think on the outside, I was getting a lot of public accolades and great media. But all through that junior year, when the organization started to take off, I was also going to the emergency room like once a month because I would pass out from exhaustion. And I feel like that's a part of the story that not a lot of people see, which is like, I don't want to glorify, oh, I did 20 clubs and I I was on the boys varsity baseball team, like doing shit I had no business doing, you know? But like I always try to caveat, like there were a lot of challenges and I really hustled, but I don't think I hustled in like that much of a healthy way. And I think that's a huge thing that I focus on now as I build August, is like, how do I do this in a way that's like post girl boss era, you know, and like do it in a way where I can sleep a lot and like talk about it in a really like authentic way of like not glorifying that burnout. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And on that note, you know, all of us are Ivy League students here today, and although we're ambitious, it can also lead to so much burnout and exhaustion. So how did you kind of like navigate that in college, and also when you launched August as a brand?
Well, I definitely had to learn the hard way. I went to Harvard and graduated in 2021. And I will say that I felt like at Harvard, what I really had never experienced before is like the glorification of being burned out. Where I would talk about this with my sister all the time, where it'd be like, oh, it's really weird. Like I noticed that when people say like, oh, hey, how are you? Like the thing that's cool to say is, oh, dude, I'm so fucking tired. I haven't slept in like 3 days. I've been just chugging Red Bulls all day, right? And it's like this weird, who can be the most exhausted because your time is under so much demand. And I don't know if y'all have that here. I see some nodding heads, but you know, where there's this like pride of how exhausted you are. And so I don't think that I learned like to not want to be burnt out. I think for a really long time, and conditioned into me by, I think going to one of these institutions, is you kind of, you're on the brink of burnout and you keep getting rewarded for it, right? You get into the best schools, you get the good grades, you pass the test. And so I think that even for me, like I conditioned myself to think, if I'm well rested, I'm being lazy, which is, by the way, like a core part of what capitalist thinking wants you to think of. But I think that that's something that I fully thought. And, you know, I think that I thought of rest as a waste of time. In terms of, I wish I could say, oh, and then suddenly I had a, you know, awakening and realized that I could be balanced. But like, no, I had to learn the hard way. And when COVID hit, I wasn't like traveling all the time, and I was confronted with a lot of mental health things that I think I'd been running away from a lot. And suddenly when there wasn't like a need to be burnt out because I wasn't having to travel so often, I just like had no concept of who I was. So I actually went to residential rehab for 6 weeks in 2020, like at the height of the pandemic. And it wasn't like an optional, like I volunteered to go there. It was like I burned out so bad. And so I think that for me, like I'm still figuring it out, but I think that I'm really proud of the fact that now I can say that one of the things I'm most proud of in my life right now is that I sleep like 8 to 10 hours a night. Like I slept 11 hours last night. And like that's something I'm really proud of. And I think that I wish I grew up with role models that were glorifying that instead of glorifying like hustle till you drop, no sleep, bus, another bus, you know, like that. Like that. I clearly spend too much time on TikTok now. But yeah.
I think that's such an important point, and I feel like I'm trying to learn that as well. I feel like burnout is so easy to fall into, especially when you want to be that girl boss. So I think it's really great that you've realized that and you're prioritizing rest along with your career. Shifting the focus a little bit, I wanted to know more about like how social media affects your day-to-day life and how you use it to spread such an important message. I'm sure that because, you know, periods are often seen as a taboo, you get a lot of negative criticism on social media. How do you kind of like navigate that and not let that get to you and continue with the amazing work that you're doing? Because personally, I don't think I would be able to handle that.
I think it does get to me sometimes, but I'm glad it seems like it doesn't get to me. I mean, I've been on social media since I was like 9, like made my first Facebook account when I was 9. And I think by the age 12, I was like on Instagram. And I wasn't on Instagram as an influencer. It was like, because everybody else, you know, I don't know like when y'all created your first social media accounts, but like now I think it's like 80% of 10-year-olds have a social media account, right? Even though they're not supposed to. And so I think that for me, like social media has always been a part of my life, but it was really like age 16 when I started the nonprofit that I started to view social media as a tool, as like, this is something free. And if I'm starting a job or have a goal and I'm coming from a place of I have no personal money to put towards it, the tool that I have that's at my fingertips to mobilize is social media. So I think that for me, it became like a big part of my work at that age. And within a few years, it was like how I made all my money. Like even today, like my founder salary is like the way I make money is through social media, right? And so I think that it was probably when I was like 17 or 18 where it was like it became more of my life. And I think that I, like anybody does, I think I have like a very complicated relationship with social media where it's kind of like the bane of my existence, and like getting death threats and like awful messages every day sucks. And I've gone through the cancel culture thing, I've gone through, you know, having security issues or doxing, but at the same time, it's like been so much of the beautiful part of my life too, right? Like I would have never gotten a book deal if I didn't have a social media presence. I wouldn't even be here if I didn't have social media. Like Cornell only probably invited me because they knew if they put my face on a poster, some people might have seen a social media post and might be curious to come. Like, I think that it's undeniable that social media is so powerful. And I think that you can see that effect in everything from why the concept of young people taking action has become something, because we can uniquely activate on social media, all the way to like, that's how political dollars are being spent in terms of how do you reach people, how do you change people's mind, how do you mobilize the vote? It's like through social media. And so very complicated relationship, but I think that the way that I really try to, there are a few things. I think one, my mom has always said, like, if you weren't getting pushback, you would just be like speaking into a void of people who already agree with you, and that's not really making any change. And so I think from a young age, from like being 16 and like talking about periods at the school assembly, I tried to really like assuage my fears with that over like, okay, every time I get pushback, it's me realizing that this work is needed because it is stigmatized, right? And if I wasn't getting pushback, it means that I'm talking to a void, I'm not making any difference, and activism is fighting the status quo, and so pushback is an inherent part of how you can measure progress. So that's one part of it. I think another part of it is like, I have to delegate. So like Casey, who's here and who is a sophomore at Cornell, has been my assistant for like 2 years, and she handles most of my DMs, like commenting, like doing a lot of stuff, and like me making that, one, having that trust, but also like investing in having support there is really important. Like I think I have a lot of influencer friends who like want to do it all themselves, and like they're the ones who burn out because you're reading through that toxicity. And I have to be like, Casey, I'm sorry to put the toxicity on you, but I'll pay you for it. You know, like, but I think that it's like important to have those boundaries over like, I can't be so alone in this, and I need to invest in having a team, and I want to have a manager, and I want to have people so that I'm not alone in this. And then lastly, I would say that I think a lot of it is just having boundaries with it. Like I really don't spend a lot of time on social media. I probably spend like 2 hours a day on TikTok, but I'm making like 20 videos a day. But I don't spend time on the For You page. Like I'm not mindlessly scrolling, and I'm really strict with myself on that. Like I only scroll to find a sound and then make the video. I don't like go and just watch. I'm going specifically to make content. And I think to contextualize that is really important. I, again, had to learn this the hard way because I got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder when I was in rehab a couple years ago. And a lot of them diagnosing my BPD was like, hey, you went through all this trauma and you didn't know who you were when you were a kid, and then you get on social media and you have an excuse to never figure out who you are outside of this external validation. And so I think that for me, I did have to learn the hard way of when social media was taken away from me, or when it became such a negative space, I was left feeling like a worthless piece of shit. And like that's not a good thing, right? And I think that it's something that I had to learn the hard way of trying to like separate me on social media and the validation that I get, because again, the algorithm is literally who can get the most positive or negative external validation, and how do I understand who I am outside of that. And it's still a challenge. Like I have built my platform. I only started on TikTok maybe 2 years ago, and within 6 months had 2 million followers because I was posting 100 times a day. And when I was posting 100 times a day, I was posting everything. I was making TikToks in the shower. Do you remember that? TikToks in the shower, TikToks updating people when I was pooping. TikToks, literally all of this. And I still do some of that, but I got to a point where I remember being in therapy and I was like, yeah, I just realized I haven't showered in 9 days. And she was like, well, why? And I was like, well, I just feel like it's a content moment. And like, like my homework at one point was like to take a shower and not make a TikTok about it, right? And so I do think like to be on TikTok, have that be such a part of my job, but it's such a part of like my well-being and my financial stability, I have to like have boundaries. Like my therapist says it's a rule to not make TikToks in the shower so often. Every now and then is okay, but like I think that that's something that I definitely had to learn. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I ramble a lot, so you have to be like, okay, if you're just
I'm enjoying listening to you.
Just do like a yeah.
On the note about social media, you have over 4 million TikTok followers now, and I was just wondering, how did you build up the self-confidence to put yourself out there and like continue making these videos and be able to share that with such a large following and audience?
Well, if you've seen my TikTok, maybe you know that I post my period blood on social media sometimes. And I didn't always do that, right? Like I've been in the period space for almost 10 years. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until 2 years ago when I launched the brand that I started showing my period blood. And like, I think that for me, I'm still probably dismantling a lot of internalized stigma and shame about periods even now. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not so comfortable with like period intimacy, and I'm still learning so much about like, you know, clots and things. Like I still have a lot of learning to do. But when I first started the organization Period, the nonprofit wasn't called Period. That was a rebrand in 2017. When we first started, I thought that it would scare people away to have an organization called Period. So it was called Camions of Care because I thought it would be like trucks, like a tampon truck, and I typed in truck into thesaurus and camion came up. So my dumbass thought that would be a good name. So you can still look like, there are pictures of me with this old logo that's Camions of Care, and like, for a while I would say, you know, this is so important because women have this thing that's called a period. And then it was a learning process of being out in the world talking about this where I had to learn on the job, okay, how do I make sure I'm not using gender exclusive language because not all menstruators identify as women? And how can I set an example that if I don't want people to use nicknames around periods, I can't say time of the month anymore. So I feel like it's been like an evolution, and it still is an evolution of getting more and more comfortable. And so, but I never felt the need to post my period blood online. Like at running a nonprofit, I was focused on period poverty. The things I posted were the things that I felt like I needed to post, which was, let me talk about the services that we're doing, the education that we're doing. I did a lot around policy, specifically around legislation around getting period products in schools, shelters, and prisons. And in order to do that in a way where I needed to be taken seriously by literally governors, I felt like I couldn't post my period blood on social media. And then it kind of, you know, I leave that world, I start this brand. And originally I knew I wanted to be more real about period blood, right? Like when we started the brand, a goal was to take period positivity to a new level because we grew up with ads using blue liquid, and we still see ads using blue liquid, and your period is not blue. And so I knew I wanted to use red liquid, but it wasn't in my mind yet of, oh, how are people gonna react when I post my period blood? It was really once we launched product and people were like, well, how can I know that this actually works? Like, if it's more sustainable, does it actually work? Like, prove that it actually works. Mm-hmm. And then I post my period blood proving it, and they get all mad. So for me, like, I don't, like, it wasn't like this is something I'm working towards. It was just like an in the moment, like, oh, like they asked and I'll show. Like other founders have clothing companies, and the way they share their product is by wearing the clothes. So that's exactly what I'm doing. It just happens to involve some bodily fluid. And so that's really like how it became a thing on social media. And it's definitely like, when it first started happening, my account was getting banned so much, like the videos get taken down, and it still happens. But I think that like it really has been exciting to see that sort of, you know, open up, and seeing other people post their period blood on social, like, is always just really exciting for me. I mean, not because I want to necessarily see the blood, but like, it's just exciting. Like I do feel like I've seen a lot more openness.
Definitely. I think that visibility is so important, and it's amazing that you're working so hard to destigmatize periods. I think that personally I used to have a negative view on it, but I've been following you for several years now, and I think that really helped me also overcome my kind of like ickiness around periods. Yeah. So I mean, my favorite comment to get is like comments when other menstruators will say like,
I thought this was disgusting, and I had like a jump scare moment, but then I realized that my period looks the same.
Right.
And I always find that so powerful because it's true. Like, I think I definitely grew up, and my sister always gives me shit now. She's like, ew, that's disgusting. I don't want to see your vaginal discharge. But I'm like, but you have it too. And like, I know you don't want to see it for me, but like, there are so many young people out there who literally get their periods and didn't know what a period was.
Right.
Like, when they got it. Like, did anybody here have that experience? Some? Yeah, like, that's terrifying. Like, I feel very fortunate to have grown up with a mom who told me what a period was well before I got my period. And I cannot imagine what it's like to be someone where you don't even have real, actual language for your vagina or your vulva, and then you look down one day and you have blood. Mm-hmm. And like, to never having heard of that before is really, I can't even imagine how scary that must be. And it is really sad how many people I meet every day who have that experience. I think similarly, like, and to answer your question on like the social media hate, I think this is why I don't get so worked up about it, and I don't feel like I'm personally crumbling over it, because I believe so much in this content, and I believe so much in the need for the education that like any hate I get, to me, just exposes more about the commenter than it does me, right? Like, when I get comments from other people who are like, that's disgusting, I'm like, you either get a period and you're revealing a lot of internalized misogyny and shame that you have, that's like a you problem, or like you're a non-menstruator and you're never gonna be able to be a supportive global citizen because you aren't comfortable talking about something that makes human life possible. Like, I think at a certain point, like, when someone comments about my period, I think of it more as like them commenting about all period blood, not specifically about like my uterus, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That definitely makes sense. I think that's a really good outlook to have, especially when you're doing work at such a high level. Shifting into August, first of all, congrats on getting into so many targets nationally. I guess I just wanted to ask, why do you think August is important in the menstrual hygiene space? What kind of led you to found it? And what legacy do you see it leaving behind?
Yeah. Well, so I started on the nonprofit side, and then a couple years ago, there were a few years where I was simultaneously leading Period and also leading this other business called Juve Consulting, which is like a Gen Z marketing agency. And I was chief brand officer there. And so for a few years, like 2018 to 2020, I was executive director at Period, chief brand officer at Juve, and then I just published this book and was on speaking tour and was growing a social platform because of that tour. So I spent 2 years working with every major period brand and every like small period brand out there as a nonprofit partner, as a consultant, or as an influencer. And so I was really getting to see behind the scenes of these bigger brands. And when you're a consultant, they don't have to they don't have to do whatever you say. You give them your recommendation. And I felt like in the nonprofit world, when I came kind of into my career there, I was taught to feel like the best way to change the system is to go in and like work and to push the system to be better, right? But I do think I didn't have language for it at the time. Like, I got stuck in this nonprofit industrial complex where I'm trying to change the exact system that I'm reliant on for fundraising to do the actual work. And I felt the same way around campaign politics. So it's like, I care about public service, I want to change legislation, but in order to become a candidate, I'm actually just raising money. And then even if people are elected, you're just raising money from private foundations and private donors to like do the work, right? So I feel like for me, I spent years believing that I could just do it from the nonprofit side. And I'm not saying nonprofit, like, they're so important. It's just like me personally, I got to a point in my career where I'm like, how am I literally a spokesperson for these companies where I'm trying to get them to be better and I'm under contract not to say certain things? How am I spending years pushing them to be gender inclusive and they're refusing because it's not aligned with their company values? Like, how can I stand here and say I want to take these products and put them out in the world when I know that they're filled with plastic, even though that there are more environmentally friendly options out there, where most pads take 5 to 8 centuries to decompose, and they know this, and they know that they could change their supply chain to be better, and they're not, right? I think similarly, being on the consulting side, we were working with over 40 Fortune 500 companies, where we were coming in and the companies were saying, can you help us not greenwash? And we would say, literally not greenwash, or you don't want people to think you're greenwashing. And it was the latter, right? And so I think for me, like, I really got to a point where I was like seeing all of this, and like in my own college career was like really studying like what is capitalism, and like I personally kind of looked at all of that and felt like, for me personally, the solution is not to participate in capitalism, but is to acknowledge the reality that we're of a generation that, even though there is further anti-capitalist rhetoric, and I think that capitalism is the cause of so many inequalities and is fundamentally about creating inequality, I think it's unavoidable, because that's what this system has been built off of. And the way you make change in this world through social movements or whatever needs resources. And we're a generation that, along with being more critical of capitalism, are the biggest consumers in history, are spending more time on social media, which are some of the biggest corporations in the world. And whether we cared about research, public service, or whatever, social movements, all of those only can happen at a larger scale if they have resources. And so for me, I think it was a really big transition moment of feeling like, one, I was just really unhappy. I was like, if only I had my own period brand that made better products, that did everything that I want these other companies to do. And if I could rip the Band-Aid off of this industry and say, hey, hello, this is what period positivity looks like. I would say another part of it is, and you'll see this in my book, my favorite chapter of the book to write is about the commodification of period care. And before I wrote the book, if people would ask me, why do you think period stigma exists? My answer was different than after I wrote the book. Because before I would say, I think it exists because when you have your period and it's so closely tied to whether or not you can reproduce, right? It's only natural that when society is created, gender around being able to bear children, of being like a wife and a mother, are curated around this biological phase. But when I wrote the book, part of studying the industry was, I was at the Schlesinger Library, which is like the feminist archives at Harvard, literally scanning old period ads throughout the 20th century, and they're screened and scanned into the book, where I came out of it realizing well, yes, the period stigma exists because there are biological components of it, and there are, we can talk about religion and how all these things factor into creating period stigma, but it's also because of the fucking industry. In the 1930s, tampons and pads enter the market, and this industry it perpetuates the idea of convincing people, hey, your period is gross, so buy our products to hide your period, forget you have a period, make your period smell good because it currently smells bad, and don't talk about periods, don't ask questions about the product. And so I think that for me, it was a really big push of writing this book and be like, damn, these companies are responsible for creating a lot of this stigma, and thus they're the ones that have to be the ones to change it. And so that's really what I want August to be. In terms of what I want the legacy to be is the tampon tax still exists in 20 states. I think August can be a really, really core part of taking down the tampon tax, because when I was on the nonprofit side, all we could do was try to lobby, right? Which was very expensive. With August, we can just go out there and say, hey, we're not going to charge the tampon tax, and we're going to challenge every other brand to not charge the tampon tax, and we're in Target now. And in my meetings with buyers, I'm like, I think Target should take down the tampon tax, and Target should take a stand and cover the tampon tax. And I will talk about that publicly. I will talk about that with y'all. And I think even being able to be in Target, we're still trying to push them to have the aisles, the period care aisles, not say feminine care, because that is an incorrect term. But they are making changes, right? They changed it so that all in aisle says tampons and pads rather than feminine care, feminine wash. And I do hope that our legacy can be paving the way for all of these places to be different, right? If Tampax and Always comes out and says, hey, we're not going to use plastic anymore, great. I love that. If they come out and they're going to be carbon neutral, great. I love that. I want them to copy the things August is doing. If we make it cool and they make it cool, I'm not going to be upset that they're copying that, because that's the goal. The goal is to raise whatever the fucking bare minimum is to be able to get there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, I get so worked up about it.
Thank you for going off. I think those are some really great points you brought up there, and I think that it is really inspiring that you're implementing that change, just by starting that brand, and you're really pushing for change in areas where people aren't talking about those issues. So I think that's really inspiring. So thank you for the work you do. I do want to open it to the audience for questions. So if anyone has questions, we'll probably do around 4 to 5 audience questions. So yeah, we can open the floor now.
Can you share a specific moment that made you focus more on periods?
Yeah, so question was a specific moment that made me focus on periods. I would say that for me it was like when I was 16, so my sophomore year of high school, my family was like couch surfing with close friends, financial instability things, and my commute to school was like 2 hours in Portland, Oregon. And where I would change buses was in an area of Portland where there were a lot of homeless shelters. Like there was like 10 homeless shelters in like a 2-block radius there. I don't know if anybody's from Portland here. But so it was in an area where like I was meeting a lot of homeless women specifically, like through like community service work. And once I started learning about period poverty, it was just something that I was really curious about. And I couldn't find a lot online, so I would literally like get in a conversation and be like, where do you get period products? And like, you know, where do you go? And like the Central City Concern, like all these organizations they would list off, and they would tell me about how they either couldn't find them or they would try to, or like why or why not they stocked it. And I think that for me, the moments that, I think it was a culmination of a lot of different moments. It was like being in conversation about when experiencing period poverty, what these women did to handle their periods, right? And that ranged from, you can find Trader Joe's brown paper grocery bags in the recycling bins, or they give them out for free at the grocery store if you ask, and if you fold it up, it becomes a pad. Or here's a piece of cardboard, and if you take off the sides and you take the inside, the corrugated part of the cardboard, and you rub it between your hands, it's soft enough that it's like a comfortable pad, right? And for me, like, you know, I grew up, probably all of us maybe have gotten our period at some point in an emergency, and you take some toilet paper and, you know, put that in between in your underwear. But like to meet people where, you know, that is a regular, but added on top of that, there's not consistent access to clean bathrooms, a next pair of clean underwear, clean pants. And I think for me, it was really, I think hearing those stories that are what made this such a like massive privilege check, but like a fire of like, oh my God, how is this still an issue? Like, how have I never heard about this? Like, how have I grown up in like an all-girl household, and my mom being like so proud that we're a feminist household, and we've never talked about this, you know? So I think it was a really common culmination of those stories. And I think it still is. Like, I think now when I think of why, like when I'm looking for inspiration, like I love talking to people about periods, clearly, but I still think I'm learning so much. Like 2 days ago, I had a conversation with someone who had Down syndrome, and they were telling me about like how triggering it was to get their period. And I've had similar conversations with people who have like autism, where like the noise sensitivity or like any sensitivity to sound or routine can be very triggering. And so having menstruation or vaginal discharge come into someone's life, like to me, I think that it is always very humbling and very motivating to understand how periods like affect so, like, I mean, it's very obvious to say, but to be like, if you're assigned female at birth, like chances are you'll menstruate on a monthly basis for the majority of your life. And I think I still find it very motivating to, I don't know, just hear other people's experiences, because we all have barriers around us because of how inaccessible period care is, or how shitty it's been, or like how bad the period stigma is. And I think it's something that I find very motivating. Yeah.
You can choose.
Yeah.
So during your time, like throughout August, like I've noticed how much you like make a commitment to like sustainability and like being very transparent about like what you're using to source. I'm just curious, like in the future, do you have any other plans with sustainability in the company? Is it going to be with like workers, or like your energy sourcing, the products, or just even like the work environment, or
Yeah.
what you're promoting, like sustainability? Like what, like is there any future you have planned for it?
Yeah. I think we'll be the first to admit that we have so many things to go, like so many things to do. I'd say that something that we started doing from the very beginning that I really love is that we're super public about what we're doing about sustainability, but all of our goals, right? And I think that comes from like me being a disgruntled older Gen Z consumer, being like, this company says they care about sustainability, but like, what are they going to do about it now? What are they going to do about it next year? What are they going to do about it in 5 years? And so like, we currently make tampons and pads. Our tampons have plastic applicators. That is not very sustainable, right? That was a conscious decision because originally when we started the company, I thought we were gonna get everybody to use menstrual cups. And you'll read in my book that I loved menstrual cups. And then it pulled out my IUD a couple years ago and that shit was painful. And so I was a little scarred, so I went back to tampons. But when I started talking to community members, we just started asking well, what about a non-applicator tampon? The majority of community said they didn't want to touch their period blood. They don't want to stick something up, right? They don't want to use a cardboard applicator because it is not comfortable. We really felt okay, if our mission is to convert people to use better period care, we have to get them with products they're currently using and then introduce more sustainable products. So that's in the pipeline. I hope that we come out with a best-in-class menstrual cup that's sourced more effectively, designed more thoughtfully. And so absolutely, I think that in the future, I hope that August has many more sustainable options. It's very expensive to develop, manufacture these things, so it's very much maybe this year, next year that I hope to see it. But absolutely, I mean, even around being in retail, right? Being available in Target is much more sustainable than us shipping to direct consumer to people's houses, right? And that's something we're very transparent about of this is less of a carbon footprint. We are carbon neutral, we offset 100% of our carbon footprint. And one thing that we were all very on the same page about from the beginning is we wanted to be really thoughtful even about how we offset our carbon, right? Because offsetting your carbon doesn't take away from the fact that you're still having a big carbon footprint. And so how do you, override that, or not override it, but try to, reconcile for that in ways that are thoughtful. I think it is BS for companies to plant trees. And you see most companies say, for everything you buy, we plant a fucking tree. Well, first of all, that tree is not gonna offset carbon for maybe 50 to 100 years. Second of all, a lot of those tree farms are used for paper, right? That to me is a very clear example of greenwashing. And so for us, it was okay, let's talk about that really loudly and let's be really clear about the ways that we're trying to offset carbon footprint. So whether that's renewable energy, and we want to commit to traceability. So if someone asks, how are you doing this, that we can provide them all the answers. If they have questions about, how do you make decisions about how your products are transported over from China and Germany, we talk about it's by sea and not air because air is more, is harsher for the environment than sea. And in the future, how do we get to a point where we're able to ship more product in one thing rather than multiple shipments? And so I think all of these things are things that we want to be super open about, super interesting about the in the workplace question, because I think that that's something that we're thinking about a lot. And I think a lot of that comes from how do we be really mindful about the team that we have, right? I don't want to be a company that grows to 50 people in a year, right? We have 10 full-time staff, and I think it will stay around 10 for a few years, and we want to really invest in the people that we have and not scale ridiculously. And I want to be really thoughtful about the people who are there and really take care of them well. And by the way, that's something that I can do as a company, right? On the nonprofit side, I paid my people well for what was market in nonprofits, which is in our society excused to be lower. And I think that it's also hard in the nonprofit world where people can be so underpaid because there's something called volunteering, and that's very acceptable. I really actually like and appreciate that on the business side, there is none of that fine, gray area between volunteer work and staff work. It's very clear and in how you value people's time. And I think that that's something we think about a lot with sustainability within the company. Yeah.
This might be a huge leap. Do you have any plans to expand maybe universities or schools for girls' restrooms? And then the second question is maybe expanding outside of the U.S. for low and middle income countries who don't have access to period pads and all of that.
Yeah, great question. So we're actually already in a bunch of universities, not Cornell yet, so whoever's in charge of that should come talk to me. But so we are in universities now, and it's really exciting because for years I was on the side where I was just pushing companies and campuses to say, actually we had a period chapter, I don't know if there still is a period chapter, but we had a period chapter at Cornell, and they did a bunch of work around getting period products into the restrooms. But then as soon as like student government would pass it, I'd be hands off, and they would say, where do we get the period products? And I'd be like, here are my favorites. But now I get to be like, oh, like we get to see it through and like figure out how to put them out, and not only in the girls' restrooms, but in the gender, neutral restrooms and in the men's bathrooms, and like how do we be really progressive about that? We love working with schools. I hope that it's something that we can keep doing. I hope that Cornell hits us up for that. But something I'm really excited about too is like literally wherever you find toilet paper. Like I think period products should be literally wherever toilet paper is, because it's like the same concept. The difference is you can hold in your pee, you can't hold in your period blood. And I have to explain that a lot to adults. But like I'm really excited because we're in all the WeWork restrooms across the US and Canada, and very soon like going to more like national gym chains and like be in more stadiums, and like I really want to go that route, which should be super fun. In terms of like shipping internationally, I hope that we get to that point where August can have an impact internationally. But I think something that I have a lot of, I don't want to say criticism, but it is kind of criticism, like something I have hard feelings about is when I was on the nonprofit side, and a big part of our work was to literally come into communities in the global south. Like we had 16 chapters in Kenya where we would literally come in because a Western company came in and like dumped a bunch of period products, but there was no waste management system and there was no education around how to use a menstrual cup, right? Or, oh, there's a cultural, like not in Kenya specifically, but when I remember in Mexico, we had a chapter there where they were like, we just got all these tampons, but like we're a Catholic community and nobody's gonna insert a tampon, right? And so I think that when we talk about sustainability even, it is not the most sustainable for us to take period products in a ship from the US or air freight and bring it over to another country. It's much better to like work on the ground with a manufacturer within the country who also understands not only like shipping and distribution in those areas, but also like materials, cultural practices, access to local resources. So like something that I think August can do and is doing right now and can continue to expand to do is our community is very international. So like online, our social media following, but also our actual community. We host a community on Geneva, which is like Slack for Gen Z. That's the best way to describe it. And we have like 40 countries represented in that. I think that's a way that we can really have impact with like educational programs and workshops and, different webinars. But in terms of getting product there, like I would love for everybody to try August, but I'll be the first to admit that I don't think it's the best solution for everybody. And like, I will talk very openly about how I think virginity is a social construct, and the idea of your hymen breaking is a total medically inaccurate myth, right? Like, I'll talk about that, but I also don't think I have any business like going into, a culture that I'm not from, and to say like, hey, all of y'all should use tampons when that's just not like culture practices. But I have a lot of mixed feelings about it, but I hope that like online we can have like that international reach, and like I love that. And right now via Amazon we ship to 100 plus countries, and lots of mixed feelings about Amazon, but they have really helped us, one, reduce our carbon footprint with shipping, but also like be able to get products to people in other countries who are really big fans of the brand. Yeah.
So I was really wondering how, first of all, thank you so much for coming.
Of course.
But I was wondering how you went from, graduating from Harvard and having an idea of wanting to start a company and making it tangible. How did you find the resources to do that?
Yeah. So we actually started my junior year of Harvard. We had to raise $2 million before I graduated. And I did not know anything about CPG, which is consumer packaged goods. That's the industry. I started by reading a lot of books with my co-founders, like all these different books about CPG and like learning these acronyms like DNVB, which is like a digitally native vertical brand, right? Like I think for me, once I knew I wanted to create period products, it was like studying how everybody else did it and figuring out like how I could adopt that. But I think very quickly it was like, okay, I learned that I want to make period products. These are FDA approved medical devices. So what are the areas for innovation? What are the areas that we can customize? How do we get in touch with the right manufacturers and have the right advisors who've done global manufacturing and supply chain before? Something I did not realize about running a company like this is you can't just get a case of tampons, because there's a minimum quantity order when you work with larger manufacturers and when you're making a unique product. So for us, it's not like we spend $100 to get a few samples that we can sell. A minimum quantity order is like $100,000. So in order to even get an initial order, to create the packaging, to do the supply chain, to do the legal, to build the infrastructure, it is very expensive. Plus, if we're a for-profit company and we want to make sure everybody is paid well from day one and that we can work towards having really good benefits, we have to raise a lot of money. And so for me, honestly, the way we started, and I still do this now, is I was just talking to other founders and like literally cold emailing anybody who had done like a business that was either similar or like similar business model. And that included like, I was really interested in streetwear actually, because I had some mentors in streetwear and I literally went to them and I was like, what you did to a cotton t-shirt of giving it cultural identity and meaning and, you know, fandom, that's what I want to do to an 100% organic cotton tampon. And like these streetwear dudes were some of the first people who were like, all right, sign me up, can I invest? Because like they got it. Like these non-menstruating cis streetwear guys were some of like my first investments. And Bobby Hundreds, who's a designer, actually named the brand August too. Like these people were so supportive. And I think for me, my learning of how to be an entrepreneur was literally just talking to anybody who would talk to me and be like, how did you think about supply chain? When this happened, what did you do? How did you design your marketing budget? You know, can you teach me all the acronyms, right? It was just literally cold emailing people. And I still do that. Like I had several calls with like, you know, people I wanted to learn from today. And that's why like when people reach out to me and they're like, hey, like I'm starting this thing, can you review a deck or talk to me? Like, I mean, Casey knows this, like we try to go through all those DMs and I want to talk to whoever I possibly can because like that's how I learned everything. Fundraising was hard, but I think the nonprofit and political world prepared me for this because it is so much easier to raise capital when you're asking people for an investment where they're investing in you because they think that they will make money from you, rather than when you're on the nonprofit or political side where you're asking them to give money from the goodness of their heart or for a tax deduction because most of them get them, you know? But like, so for me, I think I was really prepared to go into that fundraising mode, but it was exhausting. It took us 1.5 years to raise $2 million. And that was like more money than I could have ever fucking imagined in my life. But it took us 1.5 years because we were literally pitching anybody who would listen, and then ask if they said no, we would get them to make other intros, pitching all of those people. And the thing about it is like, that we still have to do that. Like that was our pre-seed round. We've since raised a seed round. You know, we're gonna grow and work our way to raising a Series A, which will probably be raising more like 10 mil. And so like these are all things that I had no idea like what this world even was, but it was like a lot of conversations with like literally anybody who would talk to me about that. Yeah.
Cool. I think we're going to end the audience Q&A now, but thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
I took a lot away from our conversation. I'm sure everyone here did as well, so thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.